Tatif Taung. The sound of silence has its own weight, doesn't it? It presses down on your chest like a cold stone, makes every breath feel borrowed from tomorrow. Robert Sinclair knew this weight intimately as he stood in his 42nd floor office overlooking Chicago's skyline, where the city lights blurred together like tears on glass. The mahogany desk that once commanded empires now held only shadows, and a single photograph of a woman whose laugh could have filled every empty corner of this tomb he called success. I don't know where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're holding your own photograph or staring at an empty chair where someone you loved used to sit. It doesn't matter what time it is or which city sleeps outside your window, because this story will remind you that sometimes miracles wear the smallest shoes and carry the biggest hearts. Robert Sinclair's name once echoed through the marble corridors of Chicago's financial district like a prayer of prosperity. At 52, he had built Sinclair Enterprises from a single real estate venture into a sprawling empire worth over $300 million, with investments spanning from luxury hotels to cryptocurrency portfolios that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. His assets included prime properties along Michigan Avenue, tech startups in Austin, and a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds that generated enough passive income to fund small countries. But wealth, Robert had learned the hardest way possible, could not purchase what mattered most. The morning Helena died in that car accident on Lakeshore Drive, every dollar in his accounts became worthless paper, every dividend a mockery of loss. The betrayal came 3 months later, swift and surgical. Marcus Chen and David Rodriguez, his closest business partners for over 15 years, had orchestrated a hostile takeover while Robert drowned in grief. They exploited his absent-mindedness, his failure to attend board meetings, his inability to focus on quarterly reports when all he could see was Helena's empty side of the bed. The legal documents were already signed, the shares transferred, the company restructured. Sinclair Enterprises survived, but Robert's controlling interest vanished like smoke. His net worth plummeted from $300 million to barely $30, still wealthy by most standards, but poor in the currency of purpose. The golden handcuffs of success had become shackles of meaninglessness. Now the office felt like a mausoleum of ambition. Dust motes danced in shafts of light that sliced through heavy curtains he never bothered opening anymore. The grandfather clock in the corner had stopped at 3:15, the exact moment the hospital called to tell him Helena was gone. Other clocks throughout the space seemed to have followed suit, as if time itself had chosen to mourn alongside him. The leather chairs where billion-dollar deals were once negotiated sat empty, their surfaces cracked like his faith. Even the Chicago skyline, once his kingdom, now looked like a collection of tombstones piercing a gray sky. The city's heartbeat, the rumble of the L train, the honking of taxicabs, the distant music from Millennium Park, felt muffled and far away, as if the world was moving underwater while he remained suspended in amber grief. On a Tuesday morning in late September, as autumn painted Lincoln Park in shades of surrender, Robert noticed something unusual in the alley behind his building. A splash of color in his monochrome world, a small figure sitting on the fire escape of the building across the narrow street. At first, he dismissed it as another street child, one of Chicago's forgotten souls who sometimes sought shelter in the maze of downtown alleys. But there was something different about this one. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair that caught the morning light like spun copper and skin the color of warm caramel. She wore a faded yellow dress that had seen better days, and her small feet were bare despite the September chill. What struck Robert most were her eyes, large and dark and somehow ancient, as if they had seen more sunrises than her years should have allowed. The girl seemed to be drawing something on a piece of cardboard with a stubby pencil, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Every few minutes she would glance up at Robert's window with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite pity, but something warmer, understanding perhaps. When their eyes met through the glass, she didn't look away or show fear. Instead, she lifted her small hand and waved, as if greeting an old friend. The gesture was so simple, so genuine, that Robert felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking further, but perhaps beginning to mend. He raised his own hand in response, surprised by how heavy it felt, how long it had been since he had acknowledged another human being's presence. The next morning, the girl was there again. This time, she had folded her cardboard drawing into a paper airplane and was attempting to launch it toward his window. The wind caught it and sent it dancing through the alley like a lost bird before it finally settled on the ledge outside his office. Robert found himself opening the window for the first time in months, the crisp Chicago air filling his lungs with a sharpness that reminded him he was still alive. The paper airplane contained a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a man in a tall building looking down at a small girl who was looking up. At the bottom, in careful block letters, were the words, "You look sad. Lions told me sad people need friends." Robert stared at the drawing for a long moment, then looked back at the girl. She was watching him expectantly, as if waiting for his response to an invitation he didn't understand. "Lions?" he called across the narrow alley, his voice rusty from disuse. The girl's face broke into a smile so bright it seemed to cast its own light. "They live in my dreams," she called back, her voice clear as crystal bells. "They told me to find the man in the tall building who forgot how to smile. I think that's you." The absurdity of the situation, a millionaire businessman having a conversation about dream lions with a homeless child, should have sent Robert back to his desk. Instead, he found himself leaning further out the window. "What's your name?" The girl stood up on the fire escape, balancing with the easy grace of someone accustomed to precarious positions. "Lily. Like the flower. My mama says flowers grow even in concrete if they have enough faith." She paused, studying his face with those impossible eyes. "What's yours?" For a moment, Robert almost said Mr. Sinclair, the formal distance he maintained with everyone. But something about Lily's earnest expression made him choose truth instead. "Robert. Just Robert." That afternoon, Lily appeared at the back entrance of Robert's building. The security guard, an elderly African-American man named Samuel, who had worked there for 20 years, was prepared to shoo her away until Robert's voice crackled through the intercom. "Let her up, Sam. She's a friend." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor seemed to take forever, and Robert found himself smoothing his hair and straightening his tie, small vanities he hadn't bothered with in months. When the doors opened, Lily stepped into his office like a queen entering her palace, unimpressed by the floor-to-ceiling windows or the expensive artwork. Instead, she walked directly to the stopped grandfather clock and placed her small hand against its wooden face. "This is why you're sad," she said with startling certainty. "Time stopped for you. But time doesn't really stop, you know. It just gets stuck sometimes, like when the L train breaks down and everyone has to wait." Robert watched as she moved through his office, touching surfaces with reverent fingers, examining framed photographs and awards with the intensity of an art critic. When she reached Helena's picture on his desk, she lifted it carefully and studied the image. "She was beautiful," Lily said softly. "She had kind eyes. I bet she made good chocolate chip cookies." The observation was so unexpected, so specific, and somehow accurate. Helena had indeed been famous for her chocolate chip cookies among their friends, that Robert felt tears pricking his eyes. "How could you possibly know that?" Lily set the photograph down gently and looked at him with those wise, ancient eyes. "Because people who make cookies always have that special happy look around here," she said, pointing to the corners of her own eyes. "And because the room still smells a little bit like vanilla, smell memories last the longest." As the days shortened and autumn deepened into Chicago's notorious November gloom, Lily's visits became as regular as sunrise. She would appear at the building's back entrance every afternoon at 3:30, just as schools were letting out, though Robert suspected she wasn't attending any school. Samuel, the security guard, had grown fond of her too, often saving her half of his sandwich or sharing stories about his own grandchildren while they waited for the elevator. "That child's got something special about her," Samuel confided to Robert one gray afternoon. "Reminds me of my late wife's sister. She had the gift of seeing people's hearts, could tell what ailed them just by looking." Robert nodded, understanding exactly what Samuel meant. There was something otherworldly about Lily's intuition, her ability to know things she shouldn't know, to see pain that others missed entirely. During their afternoon conversations, Lily would tell Robert stories that seemed impossible, yet felt true in ways that mattered more than facts. She spoke of dreams where she flew over the city on wings made of starlight, of conversations with the lions in Lincoln Park Zoo who taught her about courage and kindness. "The biggest lion, his name is King," she explained one afternoon while cleaning the dust from Robert's forgotten awards. "He told me that brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing good things even when your heart feels all broken up." Sometimes her stories seemed to merge with memories that couldn't be hers. She knew details about Chicago's history that would impress tour guides, spoke of neighborhoods with the familiarity of someone who had walked their streets for decades rather than years. The first miracle was small, almost imperceptible. On a Thursday afternoon in early December, as Chicago's first snow began to dust the windows with crystal, the grandfather clock in Robert's office gave a single resonant chime. Robert and Lily both froze, staring at the timepiece that had been silent for months. "See," Lily whispered, her breath fogging in the suddenly warmer air. "Time doesn't really stop. It just needs someone to believe in it again." From that day forward, the clock resumed its steady rhythm, marking hours that had meaning again. Other changes followed. The office radiators that had been perpetually cold began to heat properly. The plants that Robert's assistant had abandoned began to show new growth, and the city outside the windows seemed brighter somehow, more alive with possibility. But Robert's world beyond the office remained unchanged. His lawyers continued to send updates about his reduced financial status, his former partners continued to ignore his calls, and his empty penthouse apartment continued to echo with memories of Helena's laughter. The isolation was crushing, made worse by the contrast of joy he felt during Lily's visits. One evening, as snow fell heavily outside and the city transformed into a wonderland of white, Robert found himself confessing truths he had never spoken aloud. "I failed Lily," he said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't save her, couldn't save my company, couldn't save anything that mattered. What kind of man does that make me?" Lily considered his question with the seriousness of a philosopher. "King the Lion says failing and giving up are different things," she replied. "You didn't fail her, you loved her. Love doesn't fail, Robert. Love just changes shape." That night, for the first time in months, Robert slept peacefully. But storms, as any Chicagoan knows, often follow the calmest weather. The confrontation came on a bitter January morning, when the wind off Lake Michigan cut through the city like a blade. Maria Gonzalez, Lily's mother, burst into Robert's office like a hurricane of protective fury. She was younger than Robert had expected, perhaps 35, with the same dark eyes as her daughter, but hardened by experiences that had taught her to trust no one, especially wealthy men who showed interest in her child. "I know what you are," she hissed, her accent thick with emotion. "Rich men who play games with poor children. I won't let you hurt her." Robert tried to explain, tried to make her understand that his relationship with Lily was innocent, healing, even sacred. But Maria's fear was louder than his words. "Lily will not come here anymore," she declared, grabbing her daughter's small hand with desperate strength. "We are moving away from this place, away from you." As they left, Lily looked back over her shoulder, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Remember about the lions, Robert," she called out. "Remember what King said about being brave." And then they were gone, leaving Robert alone with the ticking clock and the weight of misunderstanding. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Robert's life. Without Lily's light to guide him, he sank deeper into depression than he had ever imagined possible. The office felt like a prison, The city like a graveyard. He stopped eating regularly, stopped returning phone calls, stopped pretending that tomorrow might be different from today. His remaining business interests suffered as he neglected meetings and ignored opportunities. Even Samuel, the security guard, noticed the change. "Where's your little friend?" he asked one gray February morning. When Robert explained about Maria's fears, Samuel shook his head sadly. "Fear makes people do foolish things," he said, "but love usually finds a way. You'll see." Robert wanted to believe the old man's wisdom, but hope felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. The stock market had taken another downturn, erasing more of his remaining wealth, and his investment portfolio was performing worse than his broken heart. Cryptocurrency prices had plummeted, taking his Bitcoin holdings with them, and the real estate market in Chicago was stagnating. Financially, emotionally, spiritually, he was bankrupt in every currency that mattered. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was the first day of March, when Chicago begins to remember that winter won't last forever, and the city starts to shake off its coat of snow and ice. Robert arrived at his office to find an envelope slipped under his door, not delivered by any messenger service, but placed there by small hands in the night like an offering to sleeping gods. Inside was a letter written in the careful script of a child who had learned to write by copying words from library books, each letter formed with the concentration of someone for whom written language was still magic. "Dear Robert," it read, "Mama says I can't see you anymore because she thinks you might hurt me. But lions can't be hurt by people who read stories and fix clocks. I wanted you to know that I'm not mad at you for making Mama scared. Sometimes grown-ups get scared of good things because they forgot how to tell the difference between good scared and bad scared. I'm going away now to live with my tia in San Antonio where the sun is warmer and the flowers bloom all year. But I wanted to give you something before I go." Wrapped in the letter was a small object that took Robert's breath away. A tiny carved lion, no bigger than his thumb, worn smooth by countless small fingers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of a master carver, though how Lily had come to possess such a treasure remained a mystery. But more miraculous than the carving itself was what happened when Robert held it. Images flooded his mind, not his own memories, but something deeper and truer than memory. He saw Lily as a much younger child, perhaps 4 or 5, standing in Lincoln Park Zoo with tears streaming down her face as she watched a magnificent lion pace behind the bars of his enclosure. He saw her whispering to the great cat, her small hand pressed against the glass, and he saw the lion approach the barrier with unusual gentleness, as if drawn by her pure heart. The vision was so vivid, so impossibly real, that Robert could smell the zoo's mixture of hay and hope, could hear the distant laughter of other children, could feel the warm press of summer sun on his shoulders. In that moment, Robert understood something that his rational mind had been fighting for months. Lily was real, but she was also something more than real. Whether she was an angel, a messenger, or simply a child so pure of heart that she carried heaven within her, didn't matter. What mattered was the gift she had given him, the ability to see beyond his own pain, to believe in mysteries larger than loss, to have faith that love could return even after it seemed completely destroyed. The carved lion seemed to pulse with warmth in his palm, and Robert felt something he hadn't experienced since Helena's death, not happiness exactly, but the possibility of happiness, hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing but just as capable of flight. He pressed the lion to his chest and wept, not tears of grief this time, but tears of gratitude for a small girl who had appeared in his life like snow on summer lawns, impossible and beautiful, and exactly what his frozen heart had needed. That afternoon, Robert did something he hadn't done in over a year. He left his office not to go home to his empty penthouse, but to walk the streets of Chicago with purpose. He visited the children's hospital where Helena had volunteered for so many years, spoke with administrators about funding a new wing dedicated to pediatric care. He toured community centers in neighborhoods he had never seen, places where children like Lily faced challenges that made his own problems seem insignificant by comparison. He established the Helena Sinclair Foundation for Children's Welfare, using not just his remaining millions but also his time, his energy, his awakened heart. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to save others, he was saving himself. Money began to flow again, not into his accounts, but through them, carrying purpose and hope to places where both had been in short supply. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was visible to anyone who cared to look. Samuel noticed it first. The way Robert walked differently, stood straighter, smiled at people he passed in the hallway. "You found your way back to yourself," the old security guard observed. "That little girl was sent for a reason, and you were wise enough to listen." Robert's remaining business ventures began to prosper as well, though prosperity now meant something different than it had before. Success was measured not in profit margins, but in the number of children who received medical care they couldn't afford, in the community centers that stayed open late so working parents had safe places for their kids, in the scholarship programs that gave hope to families who had never dared to dream of college. The money he had lost to his former partner's betrayal seemed insignificant compared to the wealth he was generating through compassion. His net worth, in the only currency that truly mattered, was growing exponentially. Years passed and Robert's hair turned silver while his heart remained young. The Helena Sinclair Foundation became one of Chicago's most respected charitable organizations, known not just for its financial contributions, but for the hands-on involvement of its founder. Robert could be found reading to children in hospitals, helping build playgrounds in underserved neighborhoods, mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded him of his earlier, hungrier self. The office on the 42nd floor was no longer a tomb of memories, but a bustling center of activity, filled with staff members who shared his vision of using wealth as a tool for healing rather than hoarding. The grandfather clock still chimed the hours faithfully, marking time that was no longer frozen, but flowing freely toward hope. On quiet evenings when the Chicago skyline sparkled like scattered diamonds against the darkness, Robert would hold Lily's carved lion and remember the small girl who had saved his life by teaching him to believe in miracles again. He never saw her after that March morning when he found her final letter, never learned whether she was happy in San Antonio or if she had moved on to touch other broken hearts with her impossible wisdom. But her presence remained as real as breath, as constant as the lake wind that shaped the city's character. In helping hundreds of other children, he honored her memory and the lessons she had taught about courage, faith, and the transformative power of unconditional love. The lion, now worn smooth by years of grateful handling, sat on his desk beside Helena's photograph, two guardian spirits watching over his work. Sometimes Robert wondered if other people would believe his story, if they would understand how a child's innocence had rebuilt a man's shattered empire of purpose. But doubt no longer had the power to diminish the truth of what he had experienced. Lily had been real as morning light on Michigan Avenue, as real as the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls of the Children's Hospital, as real as the tears of gratitude from parents whose children had been given second chances. Whether she had really fallen from the sky or simply fallen into his life when he needed her most was a mystery he no longer needed to solve. Some gifts were meant to be accepted with wonder rather than analyzed with logic. And you who are listening to this story in your own moment of silence and searching, have you ever encountered someone small who changed your life in immeasurable ways? Have you ever been touched by innocence so pure it seemed to carry messages from somewhere beyond our understanding? Perhaps you've dismissed such moments as coincidence or imagination, the way Robert initially dismissed Lily's talk of dream lions and fallen stars. But maybe, just maybe, you're ready to consider that miracles don't always announce themselves with trumpets and thunder. Sometimes they knock on our hearts with tiny fists and speak in voices that haven't yet learned that impossible things don't happen. But this story doesn't end at the comfortable place where tragedies become triumphs and broken hearts heal completely. Life is messier than fairy tales, and redemption is a journey rather than a destination. On a humid Tuesday morning in late June, 5 years after Lily's departure, Robert received a phone call that would test everything he had learned about faith and letting go. Dr. Patricia Williams from Chicago Children's Hospital was on the line, her voice carefully controlled in the way that medical professionals learn when delivering news that could shatter worlds. "Mr. Sinclair, we have a situation here that I think you should know about. A young girl was brought in yesterday, unconscious, found collapsed in Grant Park. She's been asking for someone named Robert ever since she woke up. She says he works in a tall building with a lion on his desk." Robert's heart stopped. The carved lion sat exactly where Dr. Williams had described it, worn smooth from years of grateful touching, positioned carefully beside Helena's photograph on his mahogany desk. "Can you describe her?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "Hispanic, about 13 years old now, we estimate. Beautiful dark eyes. She keeps talking about lions and someone who helped fix time. Mr. Sinclair, she's very sick. We're running tests, but..." The doctor's pause carried the weight of unspoken diagnoses, of childhood interrupted by the cruelest possible thief. 20 minutes later, Robert stood in the pediatric wing of the hospital that bore his beloved wife's name, staring through a window at the girl who had once taught him that time doesn't really stop. Lily looked both exactly the same and utterly transformed, still small for her age, still possessing those ancient eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries, but now pale and fragile in ways that made Robert's chest tight with familiar fear. She was sleeping, surrounded by machines that monitored the steady rhythm of a heart that had carried enough love to heal the world. An IV line snaked into her thin arm, and her breathing had the careful quality of someone whose body was fighting battles that shouldn't belong to childhood. When she opened her eyes and saw him standing there, her face lit up with the same luminous smile that had first cracked his frozen heart 5 years earlier. "Robert," she whispered, her voice hoarse but still carrying that crystal bell quality that had always seemed touched with magic. "I knew you'd come. King told me you would." Robert approached her bed with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space, hardly daring to believe that this moment was real. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't name. "I've missed you so much." She reached out with a hand that seemed almost translucent against the white hospital sheets, and when Robert took it, he was shocked by how fragile her fingers felt, like bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. "I came back because I had to tell you something important," Lily said, her eyes never leaving his face. "About the lions, and about people like you who forget that love doesn't disappear just because people do." She paused, gathering strength for words that seemed to cost her everything she had. "King told me that some people are chosen to carry extra love in their hearts, but they can't keep it all for themselves. They have to plant it like seeds so it grows into forests." Robert knelt beside her bed, understanding dawning on him like sunrise over Lake Michigan. "Lily, what's wrong? What's happening to you?" Her smile was both heartbreaking and beautiful, the expression of someone far too young to understand mortality, but somehow at peace with mysteries that terrified adults. "The doctors use big words," she said with the matter-of-fact tone children employ when discussing impossibilities. "But what it means is that my body forgot how to keep fighting. And sometimes bodies need to rest. But Robert, that's not the important part. The important part is that you learned how to plant love seeds. Look how they grew." She gestured weakly toward the window, and Robert saw what she meant. Beyond the glass, the children's wing buzzed with activity funded by the Helena Sinclair Foundation, kids in wheelchairs racing down hallways, volunteers reading stories in bright corners, families reuniting in rooms where hope lived alongside fear. The seeds of compassion he had planted in his grief had indeed grown into forests of healing. Over the following weeks, as summer gave way to the golden light of early autumn, Robert spent every spare moment at Lily's bedside. She was fighting something the doctors called childhood leukemia, a thief of innocence that had apparently been stealing her strength for months before she finally collapsed in Grant Park. Her mother, Maria, had died in a car accident in San Antonio 2 years earlier, leaving Lily to be raised by an elderly aunt who could no longer provide care when the illness became serious. Somehow, with the determination that had once sent paper airplanes across Chicago alleys, Lily had made her way back to the city where she believed someone would remember her and understand why she had returned. The treatment was aggressive, involving chemotherapy sessions that left Lily weak and nauseous, but never dampened her spirit. Robert arranged for the best specialists, the most comfortable private room, the kind of care that his resources could provide but his broken heart demanded. He read to her from books about lions and courage, brought her art supplies so she could continue drawing the impossible visions that lived in her imagination, and listened as she shared stories that seemed to come from dreams or memories that belonged to someone much older. Other children in the ward were drawn to her like flowers turning toward sunlight. Her room became a gathering place where young patients found reasons to laugh despite their own battles with illnesses too cruel for their ages. During one of her stronger days in late September, as the leaves outside her window began their annual transformation into gold and scarlet, Lily asked Robert to wheel her to the hospital chapel. It was a small, interfaith space designed to provide comfort to families facing the unthinkable, with simple wooden pews and windows that cast rainbow light across worn carpet. "I want to show you something," she said, directing him to a stained glass window depicting a lion lying peacefully beside a lamb. The late afternoon sun, streaming through the colored glass, painted everything in jewel tones, and for a moment Robert could almost see the magical creatures that lived in Lily's dreams. "This is where I talked to King," she explained, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "He told me that some people are born to be bridges between the world where sad things happen and the world where love always wins. You were one kind of bridge builder, Robert. You built bridges out of money and buildings and foundations. But I was born to be a different kind of bridge." She looked up at him with those impossible eyes, and Robert felt the familiar sensation of seeing both the innocent child she was and the ancient soul she seemed to carry. "I was born to build bridges between broken hearts and the place where healing lives. And bridges have to connect both sides, even when one side is harder to reach than the other." Robert knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her small hands in his larger ones, understanding flooding through him like cold water. "Lily, you're not going anywhere. The doctors say you're responding well to treatment. You're going to get better, and you're going to grow up and change the world in ways that will amaze everyone who meets you." But even as he spoke the words, part of him recognized the quality of light in her eyes, not the dimming of approaching darkness, but the brightening of someone preparing for a journey to places where geography had no meaning. She squeezed his hands with surprising strength, her smile carrying depths of compassion that belonged to saints and prophets, not 13-year-old girls fighting battles they should never have to face. "Robert," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "remember what I taught you about time? It doesn't really stop, and it doesn't really end either. It just changes shape, like love does. The bridge I'm supposed to build isn't the kind you can see with regular eyes, but it's the most important kind, because it helps people believe that losing someone doesn't mean losing everything." She paused, studying his face with the intensity of someone memorizing details for a long journey. "Promise me you'll remember that the love you carry for Helena didn't disappear when she died. It just changed shape into all the good things you've done since. And promise me that when my love changes shape, you'll recognize it in all the children who will be helped because you learned how to plant love seeds in grief." That night, as Robert sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city where he had first lost everything and then found it again, he held Lily's carved lion and felt the weight of understanding settle over him like a familiar coat. She had not appeared in his life by accident, had not been simply a homeless child who happened to possess unusual wisdom. She had been sent, by whatever force governs such mysteries, to teach him that love is the only currency that multiplies when spent, that healing others is the surest path to self-salvation, that sometimes angels come disguised as children who speak of dream lions and paper airplanes. The test's results came on a Thursday morning when October rain drummed against the hospital windows like tears on glass. Dr. Williams delivered the news with the careful gentleness of someone who had broken too many hearts in sterile rooms, filled with medical equipment and shattered hopes. The leukemia was not responding to treatment as they had hoped. The cancer had spread to organs where even the most aggressive therapies could not reach. They were looking at weeks rather than months, and the quality of those weeks would depend on decisions about comfort versus futile attempts at cure. When Robert arrived at the hospital that afternoon, he found Lily sitting by her window, drawing with colored pencils in a sketch pad that one of the volunteers had brought her. She looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, no anger at the unfairness of a world that would steal the life of someone who had brought so much healing to others. "The doctors told you," she said simply, and it wasn't a question. Robert nodded, not trusting his voice to carry words that felt too heavy for human language. "Are you scared?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her bed that had become his second home. Lily considered the question with her characteristic seriousness, then shook her head slowly. "King explained it to me a long time ago," she said, returning her attention to her drawing. "He said that some flowers bloom for whole summers and some flowers bloom for just one beautiful day. But they're all flowers and they all make the world more beautiful while they're here. The important thing isn't how long you bloom, but how much beauty you share while you can." She held up her sketch pad, revealing a drawing that took Robert's breath away. It showed a man in a tall building looking down at a small girl, but this time the girl had wings made of light, and she was surrounded by dozens of other children who were laughing and playing and very much alive. At the bottom, in her careful script, she had written, "Love seeds growing into forever forests." The final weeks of Lily's life unfolded with a grace that defied the cruelty of childhood cancer. Word of her story, the little girl who had saved a grieving millionaire and was now facing her own ultimate battle, spread throughout Chicago's media and beyond. Donations poured into the Helena Sinclair Foundation, not because Robert solicited them, but because people recognized something sacred in the narrative of a child who had dedicated her short life to healing others. Cards and letters arrived from around the world, sent by people who had never met Lily, but were moved by her example of courage in the face of impossible circumstances. More remarkably, children began appearing at the hospital asking to meet the girl who talked to lions. Some were patients themselves, fighting their own battles with diseases that had no respect for age or innocence. Others were healthy kids who had heard Lily's story and wanted to bring her drawings or stuffed animals or simply their presence. Lily received each visitor with the same luminous attention she had once given Robert, listening to their stories, sharing her wisdom about courage and love, offering comfort that seemed to flow from some inexhaustible wellspring within her small frame. The pediatric ward, once a place associated primarily with fear and sadness, became infused with something approaching joy. Dr. Williams, who had been working with terminally ill children for over 20 years, confided to Robert that she had never seen anything like Lily's effect on other patients. "She's teaching them that dying doesn't mean losing," the doctor said during one of their conversations in the family lounge. "I've watched children who were terrified of their own diagnoses become brave after spending time with her. She's giving them permission to be scared, but also to hope for things beyond medical outcomes. It's the kind of healing that doesn't show up on charts or test results, but it's the most important kind there is." On a crisp November evening, as the first light snow of winter began to dust the hospital windows, Lily asked Robert to bring her the carved lion from his office. She held the small wooden figure in her palm, tracing its worn surface with fingers that had grown increasingly frail. "I want to tell you where this came from," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but still carrying that crystal clarity. "My bisabuela, my great-grandmother, She was a woodcarver in Mexico before she came to Chicago when my abuela was little. She carved this lion for my abuela when she was sick with the fever that almost took her when she was 8 years old. Bisabuela said that some objects carry the love of all the hands that have held them, and this lion has been passed down through our women for 3 generations, always going to whoever needed its strength the most. Robert listened with growing amazement as Lily continued her story. Her great-grandmother had been known in their village as a curandera, a healer who worked with herbs and prayers and an intuitive understanding of the human heart that transcended medical knowledge. The carved lion was her most powerful tool, carved from wood taken from a tree that had grown in the courtyard of a church dedicated to St. Francis, the patron saint of animals and lost souls. When Abuela gave it to my mama, Mama was pregnant with me and scared because she didn't have a husband to help her. And when Mama died, I knew it was supposed to come to you, because King told me in my dreams that there was someone in a tall building who had forgotten how to believe in love. She pressed the lion into Robert's hands, her touch as light as butterfly wings against his skin. Now it needs to go to whoever comes next, she said. Someone who needs to remember that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. You'll know who when you meet them. Robert wanted to protest, to insist that the lion belonged to her family, to her heritage. But Lily's expression carried the quiet authority of someone who had learned to listen to voices that most people never heard. "Promise me you'll keep your heart open for whoever needs this next," she whispered. "Promise me you'll remember that being a bridge builder isn't just something you were, it's something you'll always be." As November deepened into December, Lily's condition deteriorated with the cruel efficiency of childhood leukemia. The chemotherapy sessions grew shorter and less frequent as it became clear that her body could no longer tolerate treatments that offered little hope of success. Robert arranged for a comfortable hospice room within the hospital, filled with flowers and cards and the artwork that dozens of children had created for the girl who had taught them about courage. A chaplain visited regularly, not to prepare Lily for death, she seemed to need no such preparation, but to comfort the adults who struggled to understand how someone so young could face the end of life with such serene acceptance. On the morning of December 15th, as Chicago lay under a blanket of snow that transformed the city into a crystal wonderland, Robert arrived at the hospital to find Lily sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in weeks. Her eyes sparkled with an inner light that seemed too bright for her small face. Her smile carried depths of joy that defied her circumstances. "Today feels different," she told him, reaching for his hand with more strength than she had shown in days. "Today feels like the kind of day when bridges get finished and everyone can see how beautiful they turned out to be." She asked him to open the window, despite the December cold, saying she wanted to hear the sounds of the city one more time. Chicago's urban symphony drifted into the room, the distant rumble of the L train, the honking of traffic navigating snowy streets, the laughter of children playing in Grant Park, the bells of nearby churches marking the passage of hours that suddenly felt both precious and infinite. "Do you hear that?" Lily asked, her voice filled with wonder. "That's the sound of love growing. It's in every car going home to families, every train carrying people to see friends, every church bell reminding people that they're not alone. We helped add to that music, Robert. We helped make the world a little bit louder with love." As morning became afternoon, and afternoon faded into the early darkness of winter, Lily told Robert stories he had never heard before, tales of her conversations with the lions that had apparently been guiding her since early childhood, descriptions of dreams where she flew over cities, planting seeds of compassion in every place where hearts had been broken by loss. She spoke of meeting Helena in those dreams, of how Robert's wife had asked her to take care of the man she loved until he learned how to take care of others again. "She said to tell you that she never left," Lily whispered as the Chicago skyline began to sparkle with evening lights. "She said love doesn't move away, it moves through. She's in every child who gets helped because you learned how to plant love seeds in sadness." The nurses had equipped the room with monitoring devices that tracked Lily's vital signs, but as evening deepened, These mechanical measures of life seemed increasingly irrelevant. What mattered was not the beating of her heart as recorded by machines, but the way her presence continued to fill the room with something approaching the sacred. Robert held her small hand and told her stories of his own, about the man he had been before grief broke him open, about the way her paper airplane had carried him back to life, about all the children who would be helped because she had taught him that healing others was the surest path to self-salvation. "Will you do something for me?" Lily asked as the clock approached midnight, her voice now barely audible but still carrying that crystalline quality. "Will you go back to your office tomorrow and look out the window at the alley where I used to sit? And when you see another broken person who needs someone to believe in them, will you remember that love is the only currency that grows when you spend it?" Robert promised through tears that felt like prayers, understanding that he was receiving final instructions from someone who had been his teacher in the art of living with purpose rather than just surviving with wealth. Lily closed her eyes then, but not in the way of someone surrendering to death. Instead, she wore the expression of someone settling into the deepest, most peaceful sleep imaginable, confident that morning would bring wonders beyond current understanding. Her breathing slowed to a gentle rhythm that matched the falling snow outside her window, and sometime during the deep of night, as Chicago slept under its blanket of white, Lily's small hand relaxed in Robert's grasp as her spirit stepped across the invisible bridge she had spent her life building, between this world and whatever lay beyond. The funeral was held at St. Alphonsus Church on the north side, a small parish that had agreed to host services for a child who belonged to no specific congregation, but seemed to belong to everyone who had been touched by her story. The sanctuary overflowed with people who came to honor a 13-year-old girl who had reminded an entire city about the transformative power of love in action. There were wealthy philanthropists and homeless individuals, doctors and janitors, children in wheelchairs, and healthy adults who had never experienced serious illness, but somehow understood that they had lost someone important to the world's supply of grace. Robert delivered the eulogy, speaking through grief about a small girl who had taught him that miracles don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Lily believed that some people are born to be bridges, he told the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the church's acoustics. She showed us that the most important bridges aren't made of stone and steel, but of compassion and courage. Every act of kindness, every moment when we choose love over fear, every time we plant hope in the soil of someone else's despair, these are the bridges that connect us to whatever is best and most enduring about human existence. After the service, as people filed past Lily's small casket to pay their final respects, Robert noticed something extraordinary. Instead of flowers, many mourners had brought small toys, stuffed lions mostly, but also drawings, handwritten notes, and sketches that children had created in Lily's honor. The casket was surrounded by a small pride of plush lions in every color and size imaginable, as if Lily's dream companions had manifested in the physical world to escort her on whatever journey lay ahead. Among these tributes, Robert placed the carved wooden lion that had connected him to Lily's family history, knowing that it belonged with her as she ventured into whatever realm awaited souls who had learned to love without condition. But death, as Lily had tried to teach him, was not an ending but a transformation. In the weeks and months that followed her passing, Robert discovered that her influence had spread far beyond what he had imagined. Letters arrived at the Helena Sinclair Foundation from people around the world who had heard Lily's story and been inspired to acts of unexpected generosity. A businessman in Tokyo established a scholarship fund for orphaned children. A family in Munich began volunteering at local hospitals. A group of teenagers in Atlanta organized a fundraiser to provide art supplies for pediatric wards. Most remarkably, children began appearing at Robert's office building, not seeking handouts or assistance, but wanting to contribute to the foundation that honored Lily's memory. They brought piggy bank savings and bake sale proceeds, hand-drawn pictures, and heartfelt letters explaining why they wanted to help other kids who were facing challenges similar to what Lily had endured. Samuel, the security guard, now approaching retirement after 25 years of service, took special delight in escorting these young visitors to Robert's office, where they were always received with the respect due to fellow bridge builders. One afternoon in early spring, as Chicago emerged from winter's grip and the city began to remember the possibility of warmth, Robert stood at his office window looking down at the alley where he had first seen Lily. The fire escape where she used to sit was empty, but the space no longer felt abandoned. Instead, it seemed to pulse with potential energy, as if waiting for the next broken soul who might need a small miracle delivered by an unlikely messenger. The carved lion that Lily had returned to him sat on his desk, warm to the touch despite the cool spring air, and Robert found himself telling it about his plans for the future. The Helena Sinclair Foundation was expanding its mission, guided by lessons learned from a 13-year-old teacher who had understood that healing happens in both directions. They were opening a new facility focused specifically on providing comprehensive care for children with life-threatening illnesses, not just medical treatment, but art therapy, educational support, and family counseling, designed to address the whole spectrum of needs that arise when childhood intersects with mortality. Robert had also established the Lily Gonzalez Bridge Builder Program, which provided grants to young people who demonstrated unusual empathy and a desire to help others heal from trauma and loss. More personally, Robert had begun volunteering regularly at the children's ward, reading stories to young patients and listening as they shared their own dreams of lions and adventure. He discovered, to his amazement, that many children possessed Lily's gift for seeing beyond surface appearances to the deeper needs of human hearts. A 7-year-old boy with cystic fibrosis somehow knew exactly when other patients needed encouragement. A 10-year-old girl undergoing cancer treatment had an uncanny ability to sense when parents were struggling with their own fear and despair. These children became Robert's teachers in the advanced curriculum of compassion, showing him daily that age has little correlation with wisdom when it comes to matters of love. On quiet evenings when the foundation's work was done and Chicago's skyline glittered like scattered stars against the darkness, Robert would hold Lily's lion and let his mind travel back to that first September morning when a small girl on a fire escape had waved at a broken man in a tall building. He understood now that their meeting had been orchestrated by forces larger than coincidence, that Lily had been sent to teach him something essential about the nature of love and loss, and the strange alchemy that transforms grief into grace. Sometimes he wondered where she was now, whether the lions of her dreams had welcomed her into whatever realm awaited souls who had completed their earthly missions of mercy. But such wondering felt increasingly unnecessary. Lily's presence remained vivid in every child who benefited from programs bearing her inspiration, in every family that received support during impossible circumstances, in every act of kindness that rippled outward from the foundation she had helped him create. Love, as she had tried to teach him, doesn't end. It just changes shape, expanding beyond the boundaries of individual lives to become part of the eternal current of compassion that flows through the universe like an invisible river. The carved lion, worn smooth by generations of faithful hands, sat sentinel on Robert's desk as the seasons cycled through their eternal dance of death and renewal. Spring became summer, summer faded into autumn, and autumn surrendered to winter in the endless rhythm that had comforted humanity since time began. But for Robert, the passage of seasons no longer felt like loss. Instead, each change brought new opportunities to plant love seeds in the fertile ground of human suffering, knowing that such seeds would bloom into forests of healing that would shelter future generations of broken hearts learning to mend. And late at night, when the city slept and the office grew quiet, except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock that Lily had helped him repair, Robert sometimes heard echoes of crystal laughter drifting through the air, carrying messages of encouragement from a bridge builder who had completed her earthly work, but whose love continued to change shape, blessing the world in ways both seen and invisible, reminding everyone who had known her that miracles still walked among us, sometimes wearing the smallest shoes and carrying the biggest hearts. Years flowed by like water over stones, each one carrying Robert further from the morning when grief had stopped his clocks and closer to the man that sorrow and redemption had helped him become. The Helena Sinclair Foundation flourished beyond his wildest dreams, not because of his wealth, though that certainly helped, but because of the authenticity of its mission and the genuine love that motivated every program and initiative. The carved lion, now positioned permanently beside Helena's photograph, had become a symbol recognized throughout Chicago's charitable community, representing the foundation's commitment to healing that addressed both physical and spiritual needs. On the 10th anniversary of Lily's death, Robert organized a memorial service that drew hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by her brief but luminous presence in the world. The event was held in Grant Park, near the spot where Lily had collapsed that distant June morning, and the gathering included everyone from corporate executives who had been inspired to increase their charitable giving to children who had never met Lily, but knew her story and wanted to honor her memory. Samuel, the security guard, now retired but still spry at 78, served as master of ceremonies, his voice strong and clear as he spoke about the little girl who had taught a city about courage. "I knew that child was special from the first day she appeared at our building," Samuel told the assembled crowd, his words carrying across the park where Chicago's skyline provided a majestic backdrop. "She had a way of looking at people that made you feel seen, not just noticed, but truly seen. Like she could perceive the goodness in your heart even when you'd forgotten it was there. Mr. Sinclair here will tell you that Lily saved his life, but the truth is, she saved all our lives a little bit. She reminded us that love is the only force powerful enough to transform pain into purpose." During the memorial service, children who had been helped by the Foundation's programs shared stories of their own encounters with unexpected kindness. Maria Santos, now 16 and cancer-free for 5 years, spoke about the art therapy program that had helped her process her fears during treatment. "When I was scared about the chemo," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her words, "the counselors would tell me about Lily, about how she faced her illness with such brave faith. They said she believed that our job isn't to not be scared, but to do beautiful things even when we're scared. So I kept drawing and painting through all the hard treatments, and now I want to be an art therapist myself, to help other kids the way Lily helped me, even though I never got to meet her." Marcus Rodriguez, whose story brought many listeners to tears, explained how the Foundation's family support program had saved his parents' marriage during his 3-year battle with complications following a severe car accident. "My mama and papa, they were breaking apart from the stress of all my surgeries and therapy," the 14-year-old said, his words carefully chosen but deeply felt. "They felt like they were failing me because they couldn't fix what was broken in my body. But the counselors at the Foundation, they taught my family that love isn't about fixing everything perfectly. Love is about staying together through the unfixable things." Lily never met my family, but her spirit was in every session where we learned how to hold each other up when holding up felt impossible. As the memorial service continued, Robert found himself thinking about the mysterious ways that love multiplies when it's shared freely, how one small girl's compassion had created ripples that continued to spread outward in ever-widening circles of healing. The Foundation now operated 3 full-service facilities in Chicago, with plans for expansion to Milwaukee and Detroit. They had funded scholarships for over 2,000 young people pursuing careers in medicine, social work, education, and other helping professions. Most importantly, They had developed a training program that taught healthcare workers, teachers, and community leaders about the kind of holistic care that addresses not just physical symptoms, but the deeper needs of human hearts facing crisis. But perhaps the most remarkable outcome of Lily's brief life was the community of bridge builders that had formed organically around her memory. These were people from all walks of life who had been inspired by her example to look for opportunities to connect broken hearts with sources of healing. They included wealthy philanthropists and working-class volunteers, medical professionals and spiritual leaders, teenagers and senior citizens who shared a common commitment to the principle that love is the most powerful force for transformation in the universe. Dr. Patricia Williams, now in her 50s, and serving as the chief pediatric oncologist at the Helena Sinclair Children's Medical Center, had become one of the most articulate spokespeople for this philosophy of care. "When we treat childhood cancer," she said during a national medical conference, "we're not just fighting a disease, we're standing guard over hope itself." Lily taught us that healing happens in the space between cure and care, in the moments when we choose to see each patient not as a collection of symptoms, but as a complete human being deserving of dignity, respect, and unconditional love. Some of our young patients achieve full medical recovery, and others transition peacefully into whatever comes next. But all of them, every single one, has the right to experience their journey surrounded by the kind of love that makes even the most difficult circumstances bearable. The ripple effects of this philosophy extended far beyond Chicago's medical community. Social workers began incorporating Lily's principles of bridge building into their practice with families in crisis. Teachers discovered that students facing various forms of trauma responded positively to educational approaches that emphasized emotional healing alongside academic achievement. Even corporate leaders found that business cultures based on genuine care for employees' well-being produced better outcomes for everyone involved, improved productivity, increased creativity, higher job satisfaction, and stronger customer relationships. Robert, now in his mid-60s with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of joy discovered in the aftermath of sorrow, had become a frequent speaker at conferences and workshops focused on transforming personal trauma into social good. His presentations always included the story of how a small girl with impossible wisdom had taught him that the opposite of despair isn't happiness, it's purpose. "Lily showed me that suffering by itself is just suffering," he would tell his audiences. "But suffering that's transformed into service becomes a bridge that connects our darkest moments with our most meaningful contributions. The goal isn't to avoid pain. Pain is inevitable in any life fully lived. The goal is to use our pain as raw material for building something beautiful." One evening in late October, as autumn painted Chicago in shades of gold and crimson that would have reminded anyone who remembered her of Lily's favorite drawings, Robert received a phone call that would test everything he had learned about faith, hope, and the mysterious ways that love manifests in the world. The caller was Sister Mary Catherine, an elderly nun who served as administrator for St. Maria's Home for Children in San Antonio, Texas. Her voice carried the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades caring for society's most vulnerable members. "Mr. Sinclair," she said, her slight Texas accent softening the formal address, "I hope you'll forgive me for calling so late in the evening, but I have something important to discuss with you. We have a situation here involving a young boy who claims to know about you and about a little girl named Lily who talked to lions. His story is quite remarkable, and frankly, it's beyond my understanding. But the child is adamant that I contact you, and there's something about his manner that suggests we should take his claims seriously." Robert's heart began beating faster, though he couldn't have explained why. "Tell me about this boy," he said, settling into the chair behind his desk, where Lily's carved lion seemed to pulse with warmth in the evening darkness. Sister Mary Catherine explained that 8-year-old David Martinez had been brought to their facility 3 weeks earlier after his grandmother, who had been raising him since his parents' death in an industrial accident, suffered a stroke that left her unable to provide care. David was a quiet child, well-behaved but clearly traumatized by the rapid succession of losses that had upended his young life. But yesterday morning, the nun continued, David approached me with a story that I initially dismissed as childhood fantasy. He said that a girl with dark eyes and a yellow dress had visited him in his dreams, and that this girl had told him about a man in Chicago who helps children when their hearts get broken by losing people they love. According to David, this dream girl, who called herself Lily, said that her job was finished now, but that David had been chosen to carry on her work in a different way. Mr. Sinclair, I've been working with children for over 40 years, and I've learned to distinguish between normal childhood imaginings and something more significant. There's something about David's certainty, his specific knowledge of details he couldn't possibly know, that makes me think you should speak with him. 2 days later, Robert found himself on a flight to San Antonio, carrying with him a mixture of skepticism and wild hope that he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Lily's death. The city stretched out beneath the airplane as it descended, a sprawling metropolis where desert met urban development in the kind of contrast that characterized much of Texas. St. Maria's Home for Children was located in a quiet neighborhood where small houses sat surrounded by yards, filled with the kind of flowers that bloomed year-round in southern climates, exactly the sort of place where Lily might have flourished if circumstances had been different. Sister Mary Catherine met Robert at the facility's entrance, her appearance exactly matching her voice, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and the practical demeanor of someone who had devoted her life to caring for children nobody else wanted. David has been asking about you every day since I called, she said as she led Robert through corridors decorated with children's artwork and inspirational posters. He seems convinced that you'll understand something about his dreams that the rest of us are missing. I should warn you, he's been through considerable trauma for such a young child, and he expresses himself in ways that sometimes seem older than his years. They found David in the facility's library, a small boy with serious dark eyes and black hair that fell in waves around his face. He was sitting alone at a table, drawing with colored pencils and a sketch pad, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration in a gesture so reminiscent of Lily that Robert felt his breath catch. When David looked up and saw Robert approaching, his face lit up with unmistakable recognition, as if he were greeting someone he had been expecting rather than meeting for the first time. "You're Robert," David said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Lily said you would come when I was ready to learn about being a bridge builder." He held up his sketch pad, revealing a drawing that made Robert's heart skip several beats. The image showed a man with silver hair standing beside a small boy, and both figures were surrounded by what appeared to be lions made of light. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, was the figure of a girl in a yellow dress, her hand raised in what looked like a gesture of blessing. At the bottom of the page, in careful block letters, David had written, "The new bridge builder and his teacher." Robert sat down across from David, noting the way the child's eyes seemed to hold depths of understanding that belonged to someone much older. "David," he said carefully, "tell me about your dreams with Lily." The boy set down his colored pencils and folded his hands with the formal precision of a much older person preparing to share important information. "She comes to see me when the sadness gets too heavy," David explained. "She says that some people are chosen to carry extra sadness so they can learn how to turn it into extra love, but that nobody has to carry it alone. She told me about you, about how you learned to plant love seeds in the grief ground after your wife went to heaven." As David continued his account, Robert felt the familiar sensation of encountering something that transcended rational explanation, but felt more true than any purely logical narrative could be. According to the boy, Lily had been visiting his dreams for several weeks, teaching him about the nature of loss and healing in terms that an 8-year-old could understand. She had explained that love doesn't disappear when people die, but changes form like water becoming steam, still present in the world, but in ways that required different kinds of perception to recognize. She said that you would teach me how to help other kids who get scared when the adults in their lives have to go away, David continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was describing. And she said that I have a special job because I understand what it feels like when everything safe disappears all at once. But she also said that understanding sadness is just the first part of the job. The important part is learning how to use that understanding to help other people believe that new kinds of safety are still possible. Sister Mary Catherine, who had been listening with growing amazement, shook her head in wonder. David has never been told anything about your wife or your foundation, she said to Robert, and he certainly hasn't been given any information about this Lily person you both seem to know. Yet he speaks about helping grieving children with a sophistication that suggests he's been trained in child psychology. It's the most remarkable thing I've encountered in all my years of working with traumatized youth. Over the course of the following days, as Robert extended his stay in San Antonio to better understand David's situation, he found himself witnessing something that seemed like a repeat of his experience with Lily, but transformed by different circumstances and personalities. David possessed an intuitive understanding of other children's emotional needs that was every bit as remarkable as Lily's had been, but where she'd been outgoing and obviously charismatic, David was quiet and thoughtful, offering comfort through careful listening rather than inspirational speeches. The boy had an uncanny ability to sense when other children at the facility were struggling with particular aspects of their grief or trauma. He would appear at precisely the right moments with exactly the right words or gestures to help them process their pain. A 6-year-old girl who had been selectively mute since witnessing domestic violence began speaking again after David spent several afternoons sitting silently beside her, drawing pictures that somehow communicated his understanding of her fear. Twin brothers whose parents had died in a car accident found the courage to talk about their nightmares after David shared his own dreams about learning to fly over his sadness rather than being buried beneath it. But perhaps most remarkably, David seemed to possess specific knowledge about the Helena Sinclair Foundation's programs in philosophy, despite never having been exposed to information about Robert's work in Chicago. During one of their conversations, the boy described in accurate detail the art therapy program that had been inspired by Lily's love of drawing. He explained the foundation's approach to family counseling with a precision that would have impressed the social workers who had developed the protocols. Most unnervingly, he seemed to understand the financial and logistical challenges involved in expanding the foundation's services to other cities, offering suggestions that demonstrated a sophisticated grasp of nonprofit management principles. He knows things he shouldn't know, Sister Mary Catherine confided to Robert on his final evening in San Antonio. Yesterday, he asked me if the foundation had considered establishing a residential facility for children who need long-term care while their families heal from crisis. When I asked him where he got such an idea, he said that Lily had shown him dreams of a place where kids could stay safe while the adults in their lives learned how to be strong again. Mr. Sinclair, that's exactly the kind of program we've been hoping to develop here at St. Maria's, but we've never discussed it in front of the children. That night, as Robert prepared for his return to Chicago, David approached him with a small wrapped package. Lily said to give you this when you were ready to understand, the boy said, his serious expression making him look far older than his 8 years. Inside the package was a carved wooden figure, not a lion this time, but a bridge, exquisitely detailed despite its small size. The craftsmanship was unmistakably similar to Lily's lion, suggesting that both pieces had been created by the same master carver. It belonged to my bisabuelo, David explained. He made it for my abuela when she was scared about moving to America. He told her that bridges help people get from where they are to where they need to be, but that somebody has to be brave enough to take the first step. As Robert held the carved bridge, he felt the same sense of recognition and purpose that had overwhelmed him when Lily first placed the lion in his hands. But this time, The sensation was accompanied by clarity about what was being asked of him. David wasn't just another child in need of assistance. He was the next phase of whatever mission Lily had begun. The boy possessed the same gift for healing that had made Lily so remarkable, but he also brought different strengths and perspectives that would allow the Foundation's work to evolve and expand in new directions. The return flight to Chicago gave Robert hours to contemplate the implications of what he had experienced in San Antonio. If David truly had been chosen to continue Lily's work, and Robert found himself increasingly convinced that this was exactly what was happening, then the Helena Sinclair Foundation needed to prepare for significant changes. They would need to develop programs specifically designed to identify and nurture other children who possessed David's unusual talents for emotional healing. They would need to create training protocols that could help these young bridge builders understand and develop their gifts while still honoring their need for normal childhood experiences. Most challengingly, they would need to find ways to explain these phenomena to board members, donors, and professional staff who might struggle to accept the reality of what they were observing. Robert had learned, through his relationship with Lily, that some truths were too large and mysterious to be contained within conventional frameworks of understanding. The key was not to convince skeptics that miracles were happening, but to create space for miraculous outcomes to occur naturally, without forcing anyone to abandon their rational worldview in order to participate in the healing process. Within 6 months of David's arrival in Chicago, facilitated by an adoption process that unfolded with remarkable smoothness, as if invisible hands were removing obstacles and opening doors, the Helena Sinclair Foundation had launched its Bridge Builder Youth Development Program. On the surface, it appeared to be a standard mentorship initiative that trained young people to provide peer support for other children facing crisis. But staff members who worked closely with the program began to notice that certain young participants possessed uncanny abilities to connect with traumatized peers in ways that produced extraordinary healing outcomes. David, now settled in Robert's penthouse apartment in a bedroom that had been transformed into a space suitable for a 9-year-old who loved art and books and quiet contemplation, became the unofficial leader of this new generation of bridge builders. He seemed to recognize other gifted children with the same intuitive certainty that had characterized Lily's insights. A 12-year-old girl named Sarah, whose family had escaped domestic violence, demonstrated remarkable skill at helping other children process fear and develop safety plans. 10-year-old Marcus, who had survived a school shooting, possessed an unusual talent for calming panic attacks and teaching anxiety management techniques to peers who struggled with trauma-related stress. The program grew organically, guided by David's dreams, which continued to feature visits from Lily, and Robert's increasing comfort with allowing mystery to direct the Foundation's evolution. Rather than trying to systematize or quantify the children's gifts, they focused on creating environments where natural healing abilities could flourish. Art therapy rooms were equipped with supplies that encouraged both individual expression and collaborative projects. Group counseling sessions were structured to allow for spontaneous peer teaching moments. Residential facilities were designed to feel more like extended family homes than institutional treatment centers. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had been serving as the Foundation's chief medical advisor since its early days, found herself studying outcomes that challenged everything she had learned in medical school about the relationship between healing and cure. These children are achieving psychological and emotional recovery at rates that exceed anything in the literature, she reported to the Foundation's board during a quarterly meeting. More remarkably, they're maintaining their progress long-term, even when they face additional stressors or setbacks. Whatever David and his cohort are doing, it's creating resilience rather than just temporary symptom relief. But the most significant change in Robert's life wasn't professional. It was personal. Becoming David's adoptive father had awakened parts of his heart that he hadn't even realized had remained frozen since Helena's death. The boy's presence in his home brought a quality of joy that was different from but equally meaningful as the love he had shared with his wife. Where Helena had been his partner in adventure and ambition, David was his partner in service and healing. Where Helena had helped him build an empire of wealth, David was helping him construct a legacy of compassion. The penthouse apartment that had once echoed with loneliness now resonated with the sounds of childhood. David practicing violin in the early morning hours, reading aloud from books about history and science and mythology, asking questions that often revealed profound insights about human nature and the mysterious forces that govern the universe. Robert found himself looking forward to evening conversations where David would share his dreams about Lily's continuing guidance and his growing understanding of what it meant to be a bridge between brokenness and healing. She says that the work is getting bigger, David reported one evening as they sat together in Robert's office, the carved bridge and lion positioned prominently on the desk, like totems of purpose and possibility. She says that there are lots of places in the world where people have forgotten that love is stronger than fear, and that bridge builders need to go to those places and remind them. But she also says that we can't do it alone, that we need to find the other bridge builders and teach them how to work together. These conversations led to the Foundation's next major initiative, an international network of partner organizations dedicated to identifying and developing what they termed empathic leadership in young people who had experienced significant trauma. Working with children's hospitals, refugee resettlement agencies, schools in underserved communities, and youth programs in war-affected regions, the Foundation began creating a global community of bridge builders who could address the growing epidemic of childhood trauma with tools that conventional therapy often couldn't provide. The carved bridge that David had given Robert became the symbol for this expanded mission. Reproduced in various forms throughout the Foundation's materials and facilities. But more than a logo, it represented a philosophy, that healing happens not through the elimination of difficult experiences, but through the construction of pathways that allow people to move from pain toward purpose, from isolation toward connection, from despair toward hope. As years passed and David grew from a serious 8-year-old into an equally serious but increasingly confident teenager, Robert had many occasions to marvel at the way Lily's influence continued to shape their work. The Foundation's programs were now operating in dozens of cities across North America and had established partnerships with organizations in Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. Thousands of young people had been trained as bridge builders, and hundreds of thousands of children and families had received services based on the principles that a small girl with impossible wisdom had first articulated in a Chicago office overlooking an alley where hope had seemed permanently lost. But perhaps the most remarkable testament to Lily's enduring impact was visible in the completely transformed relationship between Robert and his former business partners, Marcus Chen and David Rodriguez. The hostile takeover that had once felt like the ultimate betrayal had eventually led to something approaching reconciliation, as both men found themselves drawn to the Foundation's mission and began contributing their own wealth and expertise to its expansion. "We were wrong about what mattered," Marcus admitted during a dinner meeting where the three former adversaries planned a new initiative to provide financial literacy training alongside emotional healing programs. "We thought success meant accumulating resources for our own benefit. But Lily taught us, through David's example and your transformation, that real success means using resources to build bridges for other people. We can't undo the pain we caused, but we can try to make amends by dedicating the rest of our lives to the kind of work that honors what we should have been doing all along." The reconciliation was formalized when Marcus and David Rodriguez jointly established the Second Chances Fund, an endowment that would ensure the Foundation's work could continue for generations beyond Robert's lifetime. But more meaningful than their financial contributions was their personal commitment to the bridge-building philosophy. Both men began volunteering regularly at foundation facilities, using their business expertise to help develop sustainable models for emotional healing programs and their personal experience with the consequences of greed-driven decision-making to counsel young people about the importance of ethical leadership. On the 15th anniversary of Lily's death, the foundation organized a celebration that was simultaneously a memorial service, a graduation ceremony for the latest cohort of bridge builders, and a community festival that brought together thousands of people whose lives had been touched by her continuing influence. The event was held in Grant Park, where Chicago's skyline provided the same majestic backdrop that had witnessed Lily's collapse and Robert's initial despair, but the atmosphere was one of pure joy and gratitude. David, now 23 and serving as the Foundation's Director of Youth Programs, delivered the keynote address with the same quiet authority that had characterized his communication style since childhood. But his words carried additional weight now, informed by 15 years of experience in applying Lily's teachings to an increasingly complex world of childhood trauma and societal healing. Lily taught us that love doesn't end when people die, David said, his voice carrying clearly across the park where families picnicked and children played while listening to his words. But she also taught us that love doesn't begin when people are born. Love is the eternal current that flows through the universe, connecting every heart to every other heart, and our job, as bridge builders, as human beings, as temporary stewards of this amazing gift called life, is to keep that current flowing freely. When we choose kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, connection over isolation, we're not just making individual choices. We're participating in the cosmic work of love itself. The celebration continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and storytelling that honored both Lily's memory and the ongoing work of bridge building that she had inspired. Children who had been helped by foundation programs shared testimonies about their healing journeys. Adults who had been trained as bridge builders in their own communities described the ripple effects of applying empathic leadership principles in schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods around the world. But the most moving moment came when a group of current foundation clients, children currently receiving services for various forms of trauma, presented a collaborative art piece they had created in honor of Lily's legacy. The work was a massive mural depicting a bridge made entirely of linked hands, stretching across a landscape that included representations of cities, forests, deserts, and oceans. Above the bridge, painted in colors that seemed to glow with their own light, was the figure of a girl in a yellow dress, her arms spread wide as if blessing everyone crossing beneath her. "This is what we learned about Lily," explained Maria Santos, the 16-year-old cancer survivor who was now 25 and working as an art therapist with the foundation. She wasn't just one small person who helped a few people she met personally. She was the beginning of a bridge that would eventually connect the whole world, helping everyone remember that we're all supposed to take care of each other. Every time we help someone else heal, we're adding another hand to that bridge. Every time we choose love instead of fear, we're making the bridge stronger. As the celebration wound down and families began to drift home through Chicago's downtown streets, Robert found himself standing alone in the spot where Lily had first collapsed 15 years earlier. The city lights sparkled around him like captured stars, and the lake wind carried the sounds of laughter and music from the evening's festivities. In his pocket, his fingers closed around the original carved lion that had been returned to him after Lily's funeral, warm to the touch after all these years of faithful service as a reminder of love's persistence. David approached from behind, moving with the quiet grace that had always characterized his manner. Now, a young man with the same serious eyes he had possessed as a child, he stood beside Robert and gazed out at the city that had become home to both their hearts. "She would be proud," David said simply, gesturing toward the Grant Park Pavilion where cleanup crews were already beginning to fold tables and collect decorations. All these people, all this healing, all these bridges being built around the world. It's exactly what she dreamed when she was teaching us about love seeds and forever forests. Robert nodded, feeling a deep sense of completion that had nothing to do with ending and everything to do with fulfillment. The Helena Sinclair Foundation would continue its work for generations to come, guided by principles that a small girl had intuited from her conversations with dream lions and her profound understanding of how broken hearts could be transformed into healing instruments. David would marry his longtime girlfriend Sarah next year, the same Sarah who had been one of the first bridge builders he had identified as a child, and their children would grow up surrounded by the legend of Lily and the living reality of love in action. But more than institutional legacy or family continuity, Robert felt the satisfaction of knowing that he had been faithful to the task Lily had assigned him 15 years earlier. He had planted love seeds in the grief ground of his own heart, and those seeds had indeed grown into forever forests that would shelter countless future generations of broken souls learning to believe in healing. He had served as a bridge between his own pain and purpose, and in doing so had helped construct pathways that millions of others could use in their own journeys from despair toward hope. As they walked back toward the penthouse that had been transformed from a mausoleum of memories into a home filled with purpose and joy, Robert and David passed the alley behind his office building. The fire escape where Lily had once sat was barely visible in the darkness, but Robert could almost see her there, a small figure in a faded yellow dress, waving at a broken man in a tall building who had forgotten how to smile. The image was so vivid that he found himself lifting his hand in response, just as he had done that first morning when a paper airplane had carried him back toward life. "She's still there, isn't she?" David said softly, following Robert's gaze toward the empty fire escape. Not visible, but there. Still watching, still teaching, still building bridges between the world where sad things happen and the world where love always wins. Robert smiled, understanding exactly what his son meant. Lily had been real as morning light on Michigan Avenue, as real as children's laughter echoing through hospital corridors, as real as the tears of gratitude from parents whose broken hearts had learned to beat with hope again. And now, as Chicago slept around them and the grandfather clock in Robert's office marked time that flowed freely toward an endless horizon of possibility, the legacy of a small girl who had talked to lions continued to ripple outward in ever-expanding circles of healing. In counseling centers where trauma survivors learned to trust again, in schools where empathic leadership was replacing traditional models of authority, in hospitals where children faced terminal diagnoses with courage, learned from bridge builders who understood that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. Everywhere, the work continued. The sound of silence, Robert realized, no longer pressed down on his chest like a cold stone. Instead, it had been filled with the music of love in action, the symphony of healing that plays whenever broken hearts choose to become bridges for other broken hearts, finding their way home to hope. And in that music, clear as crystal bells and bright as morning light, he could still hear echoes of a small voice saying, "You look sad. Lions told me sad people need friends." Because some miracles, once awakened, never truly end. They just change shape, growing stronger with each heart they touch, building bridges that connect our deepest sorrows with our highest purposes, proving again and again that love is indeed the only currency that multiplies when spent, the only investment that guarantees returns that last forever, the only force powerful enough to transform the sound of silence from the weight of despair into the promise of hope eternal.